AITA for refusing to talk to my abusive mother when she was diagnosed with cancer after years of severe physical and emotional abuse, including waterboarding me in the shower, kicking me out in freezing weather, and refusing to take me to the hospital when I was dying from respiratory failure. First, I should warn you that this story contains descriptions of physical and emotional abuse that might be triggering. I wish I could say I'm exaggerating, but unfortunately, every word is true. I'm 24 now, but this all happened when I was 17. My mother has been abusive my entire life, not just to me, but to my entire family. However, I've always been her primary target. She made it abundantly clear from an early age that I was unwanted, unlike my siblings. I was the mistake, the burden, the one she never planned for. Those aren't assumptions. These are things she's told me repeatedly, often in front of others. The physical abuse started when I was young. I can't even remember when it began because it's been a constant throughout my childhood. The worst was what I now understand was waterboarding. She would force my head under the shower, holding me there while I struggled to breathe, water filling my nose and mouth. To this day, I can't take a shower without having panic attacks. I've gotten better through years of therapy, but I still get flashbacks every single time water hits my face. I take extremely quick showers with my face turned away from the stream, and even then, I sometimes have to step out mid-shower to catch my breath and remind myself I'm safe now. When I was 16, something happened that I didn't have the vocabulary for at the time, but now recognize as sexual assault. I won't go into details, but I don't believe she meant it that way, not that it makes it any better. But understanding that has been part of my healing process, separating intent from impact. The verbal and emotional abuse was constant. I was worthless, stupid, ugly, fat, unlovable, a burden, the reason for all her problems. Nothing I did was ever good enough. If I got an A, why wasn't it an A+? If I cleaned the house, why did I miss that one spot? If I cooked dinner, why didn't I make her favorite? But perhaps the most insidious part was the parentification, being forced to grow up too fast and take on adult responsibilities. By 12, I was essentially raising myself. By 14, I had become my mother's emotional support person, her confidant, her makeshift therapist. She would pull me into her bedroom late at night to vent about her marital problems with my father, including intimate details about their sex life that no child should hear from their parent. She would cry on my shoulder about financial troubles that I couldn't possibly understand or solve. I remember one night when I was 14, sitting on the edge of her bed at 2 a.m. on a school night, listening to her describe in explicit detail why she thought my father was no longer attracted to her. I was physically ill from exhaustion and discomfort, but knew that if I tried to leave, the consequences would be severe. The next day, I had a complete breakdown at school. My teacher found me sobbing in the bathroom, unable to stop. That was the first time anyone suggested I might need therapy. But therapy wasn't an option with her. Suggesting there was something wrong with our family dynamic was unacceptable. What happens in this house stays in this house was practically our family motto. So I learned to cope alone, developing anxiety, depression, and what I would later learn was complex PTSD. When I was 17, after years of this treatment, something in me finally broke. We had a massive fight. I don't even remember what started it, probably something trivial. But this time, instead of accepting her abuse, I stood up for myself. I told her I was done, that I would never speak to her again. And for the first time in my life, I actually stuck to my decision. For several months, I maintained complete silence toward her, despite living in the same house. My dad and siblings would relay necessary messages, like chores I needed to do. It was tense but manageable. I was counting down the days until I could legally leave. Then one day, she approached me, almost humble, almost kind. She begged me to talk to her again, said she missed me, that she wanted to repair our relationship. After weeks of persistence, I reluctantly agreed to one conversation. That's all it took. One conversation where I didn't immediately agree with everything she said, for her to completely snap. She kicked me out of the house. I was 17, a minor, with no ID, no money, no phone, no belongings except the clothes I was wearing. Our house was rural, at least a 3 to 4 hour walk from the nearest town or any place I could seek help. It was winter, raining heavily, and temperatures were forecast to drop below freezing that night. I started walking, soaked to the bone within minutes, with nowhere to go. I genuinely believe I would have died that night if my father hadn't found me. I was several miles from home, shivering uncontrollably, my lips blue, barely able to walk anymore. He brought me back home against my mother's wishes, hiding me in his study until she calmed down enough to allow me to stay. After that night, I went back to not speaking to her. How could I? She had been willing to let me freeze to death rather than deal with my disrespect. It was during this silent period that she was diagnosed with cancer. My dad sat me down to tell me, explaining what type it was. I immediately researched it and learned that it had an extremely high survival rate. Something like 98% of people go into complete remission after treatment. This wasn't a death sentence. It was a treatable condition. Now, I need to provide some context here. This was far from my mother's first health crisis. She had a pattern of medical issues that would consume all the family's attention and resources. Some were legitimate, others seemed convenient in their timing. But regardless of their validity, one thing remained constant. When I was severely ill, she offered no care or concern whatsoever. When I was 15, my autoimmune disease caused a severe flare-up that led to respiratory failure. I couldn't breathe, my lips were turning blue, and I was terrified. When I begged her to take me to the hospital, she accused me of being dramatic and attention-seeking. She refused to drive me or call an ambulance. I was likely minutes from death when, by some miracle, the flare-up began to subside. To this day, doctors tell me I should have been hospitalized during that episode. Around the same time, I needed to have my wisdom teeth removed, my first surgery. My mother couldn't be bothered with any of it. I had to forge my dad's signature on the consent forms because while he was willing to show up for the actual surgery, he wouldn't take time off work for any of the preliminary appointments. My mother simply didn't care. I arranged everything myself at 15, including figuring out how to get to and from appointments. So when she was diagnosed with cancer, I didn't suddenly abandon my resolve. I continued not speaking to her. I didn't mock her illness or celebrate it. I simply maintained the boundary I had established for my own safety and mental health. And her cancer treatment went exactly as statistics suggested it would. She had surgery, went into remission, and has remained cancer-free since. When I turned 18, I attempted to move out immediately. I had been saving every penny from my part-time job, but it wasn't enough for a sustainable living situation. I ended up in a dangerous living arrangement and eventually had to return home. As part of the agreement for moving back, I was forced to promise that I would speak to my mother again. Since then, I've become her primary caretaker. When she had a total hysterectomy, I was the one changing her bandages, bringing her meals, helping her to the bathroom. Despite doctors' orders that she avoid physical activity, she demanded I help her rearrange furniture just days after her surgery. This led to complications that extended her recovery by weeks, for which she blamed me. The abuse continues, though it's slightly less intense now. I've learned to manage her moods better, to anticipate her rage and diffuse it by essentially debasing myself, agreeing with her insults toward me, apologizing profusely for things I haven't done, praising her for basic human decency. It's exhausting, but it's survival. And yet, despite everything I do for her now, she still brings up my monstrous behavior during her cancer diagnosis. At least once a month, she'll mention how I abandoned her. When she was dying, she wasn't. How I proved what a heartless person I am. How no decent human would ever ignore their mother's cancer. She's told family members, friends, even strangers at the grocery store the story of her cruel daughter who abandoned her in her time of need. I've apologized countless times over the years, mostly to keep the peace. But deep down, I don't believe I was wrong. I was a traumatized 17-year-old trying to protect myself from someone who had proven repeatedly that she was willing to harm me. Someone who had never shown me care when I was ill, who had in fact endangered my life by denying me medical care. Someone who, just weeks before, had thrown me out into freezing weather without a second thought. But her constant accusations have gotten under my skin. Family members have sided with her, telling me I should have put aside differences during her illness. Friends who don't know the full story look at me differently when they hear I abandoned my mother during cancer. Even my therapist, who generally validates my experiences, gently suggested that perhaps I could have shown some compassion without compromising my boundaries entirely. So here I am, years later, still wrestling with guilt over a decision I made as a desperate teenager. Am I the monster she claims I am? Should I have pushed aside years of trauma and abuse the moment she received her diagnosis? Would a better person have done that? I should mention that I'm not completely heartless. When my father was diagnosed with a serious condition last year, I dropped everything to care for him. I took time off work, slept in a chair by his hospital bed, advocated for him with doctors, and helped him through his recovery. The difference is that my father, while not perfect, has never abused me. He's been neglectful at times, yes, but he's also been the one to step in when my mother's abuse went too far. He's apologized for not protecting me better and has worked to repair our relationship. With him, compassion comes naturally because there isn't a mountain of trauma blocking it. I've spent years in therapy working through my childhood. I've been diagnosed with complex PTSD, anxiety, depression, and an eating disorder, all directly linked to my upbringing. I've made tremendous progress, but certain triggers still send me spiraling. My therapist says that's normal, that healing isn't linear, especially from long-term developmental trauma. But all that progress feels erased when my mother brings up the cancer incident. In those moments, I'm that scared, guilty teenager again, wondering if maybe I am the villain in this story. So I guess what I'm asking is, am I the bad person here? Was I wrong to maintain my boundary of no contact when she was diagnosed with a highly treatable cancer? Should I stop making excuses for teenage me and accept that I acted cruelly? Or is this just another manipulation tactic from someone who has been manipulating me my entire life? I genuinely don't know anymore. When you grow up with abuse, your sense of normal gets so warped that sometimes you need outside perspectives to recalibrate. So please, tell me honestly, am I the bad person for ignoring my abusive mother when she got diagnosed with cancer? Because right now, I'm living as her caretaker, apologizing regularly for something I did years ago as a traumatized minor, and still wondering if maybe she's right about me after all. And the uncertainty is eating me alive.